special needs planning and mental illness. And most importantly, this is an extraordinary story of hope. And that's what we can come away from today's talk with. If you're watching this as a recording, like this video, subscribe to our Gilfix Law YouTube channel. And I think I see more and more people signing in. So I think we're going to get started right now. So before we jump into the content here today, take a moment and just think about what drove you to join us here today. Do you have a child or a loved one with a mental illness? Anybody in your life, a friend's child who's dealing with a loved one with mental illness? Do you feel hopeless about it? Do you feel overwhelmed? We are here to help, and we're here to share, again, a story of hope. What are we going to talk about today? Well, first, we're going to start with a special story. I'm going to introduce our wonderful guest in just a moment. We're going to go through some key takeaways from her story, and we're going to talk about how we can help at Gilfix on the Pole and the legal planning steps you need to have in place. I want to remind this is for educational purposes only. It's not legal advice. It doesn't create an attorney-client relationship. We can only do that if we're working with you one-on-one directly. And for those of you who don't know us, just a really quick background on who we are. We're Gilfix on the Pole Associates. We're based in Palo Alto, California. We serve clients from San Diego all the way up to Wairika. We've been around for over 40 years, very proud of our legacy. Michael Gilfix, one of the founders of the firm, as far as we know, we were one of the first firms in the state of California to do special needs trusts before they were even known as special needs trusts. We have a rich and deep history in that world, and we're very proud of that heritage. We've helped hundreds of California families with special needs planning, and it is one of the most powerful things that we do. And it's just, it gives us such joy to be able to serve that community. So without further ado, I want to introduce our guest speaker today. Her name is Moryt Milo. And Moryt is an award-winning journalist who's been covering local news in the Bay Area for more than 2 decades. She is a NAMI Santa Clara County board member. She writes a monthly blog on various mental health issues for NAMI. And there's going to be more information about that in a moment. But I think most importantly today, she is also a mom. And she has dealt with a lot of the issues that we address very personally. And I think her story is really extraordinary. And she's very kindly offered to share it because she wants to offer hope and guidance to other families as well. So with no further ado, Moryt, wonderful to have you here today. I'm going to stop sharing the slides. I'm going to turn off my camera in a moment. Mike and I will turn off our cameras. And welcome. Why don't you take it from here?
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Mike, both of you, for allowing me to tell this story. You know, as I tell you how I battled the mental health care system to save my son, I want all of you to know that my son's story is not a fluke. As there are so many parents, siblings, and family members going through the same harrowing experience, and if you're one of them, you are not alone. This experience feels like it comes out of nowhere. For us, it was 2 days after Christmas 2012, when my 21-year-old son suffered his first psychotic break 900 miles away at college in Spokane, Washington. It began with a frantic midnight call from jail. Panicked and frightened, my husband and I flew up to Spokane, completely unaware of what had happened. We later found out that my son had thrown a chair through a window and vandalized a car. We needed a lawyer to sort out his situation. And when I first spoke to the lawyer, I recalled him saying, "You have a long road ahead. It won't be easy." Honestly, at the time, I had no clue what he meant. I barely understood what was happening in the moment. And during those first weeks, my son's hospitalization in Spokane began and reality set in. All those dreams I had so innocently took for granted, his education culminating in a cap and gown, a job, maybe a soulmate, a happy, productive future. I never imagined his universe playing out any other way. I never imagined it collapsing. In Washington, his care went smoothly. He was treated for 3 weeks without a hitch, and I falsely assumed that mental health care wasn't any different than physical care. He began to stabilize and fight his way back from an illness that had made him paranoid and psychotic. I naively believed he would recover, that the illness would slink away. I understood little, even after the doctors in Washington diagnosed him with bipolar disorder. But I vowed to educate myself. Still, I thought the proper treatment would, everything would just return to normal. It wasn't until we returned to California that the truth reared its ugly head. First, he was reevaluated and diagnosed with schizophrenia. That shock felt like a death sentence, but we all refused to let that take him down. Then my son stopped going to his psychiatrist and lost his therapist, and his safety net collapsed. And he stopped taking his medications and claimed he was well. I tried desperately to get him back on track, to no avail. And then I let my heart, not my head, guide me when he desperately wanted to return to college. We set him up in an apartment in Santa Cruz. He was close to school and other resources, but he was mentally fragile. I made a catastrophic error thinking he would live independently, that the decision sent my son, and that decision sent my son into an irreversible downward spiral. Within a month of moving into his apartment, his world would crumble, and he would experience his second psychotic break. That ended up with him smashing my husband's car with a hammer and us calling 911. The police took him to the hospital on a 5150 psych hold, and I falsely believed my son would be treated in the same manner and with the same compassion he received in Washington. Instead, I became schooled in California's horrific mental health system, a system truly designed for failure. Over the next month, he fell into a revolving door of being taken to the hospital and discharged untreated days later. Honestly, it was akin to a doctor saying, "Come back and see us when you have stage 4 cancer. We can't help you until that disease has completely metastasized." And in the end, that's exactly what happened. My son's physical and mental health deteriorated as the illness wreaked havoc, and all we could do was stand on the sidelines and watch as the healthcare system failed him repeatedly. From 2012 through 2013, he would be in and out of 4 different hospitals, permitted to walk away from transitional housing and residential treatment facilities. He would be picked up by the police for his erratic behavior. He'd scare the tenants in the apartment complex, screaming and yelling as voices battered his brain. He would stand in the middle of the street holding a knife, threatening invisible people in his delusional reality. The landlord, of course, asked me to move him out, or he would be evicted. But he refused to come back home, and I didn't and couldn't get him the hospitalization he needed because of HIPAA regulations. He was a minor, he was over 18. He was not a minor, he was over 18. Instead, the law gave my psychotic son complete authority over his own mental health care. Each episode only tore him further from the reality. On one occasion, he was transported from a Santa Cruz hospital to one in Sacramento. I didn't even know he was there until he called me about 6 days later. When my husband and I arrived, he was discharged, untreated, paranoid, and psychotic. He ran from us, forcing us to call 911, get the police to chase down a public bus, and I had to cajole the police into convincing him to get into our car so we could take him back home. If he had never called and he had been discharged, I would have lost him on the streets of Sacramento. On the few occasions he was hospitalized, treatment was always short-lived. He couldn't live alone, and self-managed care by himself was impossible. Each setback, each time his illness grew worse. When he was hours away from being evicted, we managed to get him resettled at a residential facility. Except the lack of oversight at the home allowed him to drive off, even after he actually told them he was leaving because he had an appointment with the FBI in San Francisco. Then they called me, and I was absolutely livid. How could they do such a thing? They had promised to rehospitalize him if he appeared unstable, and instead they did absolutely nothing. We were living in a horror show. My frustration with the mental health care system had reached epic proportions, and I didn't know where to turn. My sense of isolation, my fear were all palpable. I found NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and went to their support groups, where others had the same nightmares and frustrations, and I did feel less alone. They gave me an important tool, a form to document my son's mental health history, to write down his hospitalizations, medications, and doctors. I filled out everything and kept copies in my car to hand to nurses and doctors whenever he was hospitalized. I could talk to them even if they wouldn't talk to me. But beyond that, my emotions were stuck in fight or flight mode. I was so upset at the level of dysfunction and how it had put my son in harm's way. I left my work. I left my job where I managed a newspaper and put everything on the back burner because none of this was my son's fault. I only had one purpose: to find my child, get him off the streets and into treatment. My husband and I would search those San Francisco streets on a weekly basis in an effort to save him from a fate he never deserved. And when I did find him, my beautiful, brilliant child, filthy, in tattered clothes, confused and suffering, my heart broke and I shook with anger. Everything about this situation was inhumane. He was among the sickest of the sick. He had been marginalized and been tossed into the gutter. He couldn't help himself, and I didn't know how to help him. I was consumed with finding a solution, so I did what I knew best. I reached out to my news network and worked to string together a plan. I surrounded myself with professionals in the behavioral health sector because expert help is critical to battling the system. I developed a strong bond with the Stanford psychiatrist my son saw before moving to Santa Cruz. He met with my son just once, but I stayed connected. We talked frequently. Without his guidance, I'm not sure I would have been able to weather through the crisis. I also connected with the executive director for behavioral health at El Camino Hospital. The hospital has an excellent acute care program, and I built a relationship with him as well. And I connected with the Santa Clara County behavioral health director. I wanted to plan ahead and have all my options available when I knew that window would open maybe once. I ruled out nothing and had all these people literally on speed dial. I even went to speak to my local police chief in town and told him everything about my son and gave him a picture. I was fearful that once he came home, any interaction with the law could be fatal. And honestly, throughout this fight, my greatest fears were my son would be victimized, jailed, or die. What I learned from all the false starts and heart-wrenching times we found was that my son would never get well without a continuity of care plan. And that meant going from crisis to treatment, to stabilization, to recovery with a safety net. Without those 4 seamless steps, no one with severe mental illness can make it. But first, I had to get him off the streets, and I kept asking myself how. It came down to research, a network, perseverance, and honestly, a hell of a lot of luck. There is no science and no playbook here. And one night, luck came knocking. My son called after midnight to ask if he could come home. We raced up 280. I texted him as we got closer, praying that he hadn't changed his mind. We entered a Safeway shopping center and crept through the parking lot. And out of the shadows, a tall, skinny figure emerged from the bushes, carrying a rolled up sleeping bag on top of a gym bag. And I thought, this must be how he lived, hiding, camouflage from danger when he slept. My emotions were overcome and twisted with a combination of sadness and hope. After 9 months on the streets, my 22-year-old looked beaten and weathered. He carried the stench of the city, and you know what? I didn't give a damn. When he got into the car at 1:30 in the morning, I knew he would be sleeping in his own bed. He could take a hot shower, and he could wash away the grime of the city. I knew for a long time that if I could just get him home, he could be safe. Miraculously, had survived the threat of drug addiction and alcohol dependence, but he was frail and his brain was broken. His 6'2" frame couldn't have weighed more than 150 pounds. But even after I got him home, I couldn't get him into the hospital, not without his consent or through a psych hold, and that meant police and handcuffs. Even then, I had no guarantee he would pass the first 72 hours and get into that 14-day involuntary hold. The process had failed us so many times before. Then about a month after he'd been home, he took off in our car to San Francisco. But this time, when I reached him on the phone, he sounded frightened and confused. And that's when we caught another lucky break. I had read so many books about mental illness by then and been through so much with him. I had developed my own kind of special techniques, staying calm, listening, not arguing, and not disagreeing. And all that helped me gain his trust. So in that moment, I knew I might have my one chance. We drove back into the city to pick him up, and I nonchalantly mentioned, maybe a doctor could check him out. Never once did I suggest that he had a mental health problem, because I knew he didn't think he did. I only had one goal, finding a way to negotiate him through the emergency doors of El Camino Hospital, which was my first choice for treatment. When I suggested it, to my surprise, he agreed. And that's probably because it was the only hospital he had not been admitted to and didn't think it was a trap. I snuck a text off to the behavioral health director at El Camino and let him know we were coming. I prayed the hospital would have an open bed because that was always a challenge. He alerted the charge nurse, and then they put my son on a psych hold soon after he walked in. A bed opened up and my son was admitted. Only then, because he had a documented history of medication and treatment noncompliance, homelessness, and had become a danger to himself, were we able to get him past that 72-hour hold into that 14-day involuntary hold so the doctors could have a fighting chance to get him conserved. Only then did the medical team have time to find help and find the right medications and start him on the road to recovery. Without that conservatorship, I don't think we would have made it. We would have been back to square one. The mental health system in our country functions in a reactive, not proactive manner. Imagine if you came into the hospital on the verge of a heart attack and needed a stent, and the cardiologist said, sorry, I need to wait until you have that heart attack. Welcome to the world of mental health care for those with severe mental illness. But my son did have a fighting chance this time. He was at El Camino for 2 months. It took 6 weeks just to get the medications right. Unlike previous situations, the hospital refused to discharge him without a proper transition plan. And with that in place, he went into a 24/7 unlocked residential facility in Palo Alto. He had been there before, and he had transitioned when we transitioned from Washington. So I knew this time he wasn't going to drive away in a car. But I also become a pro at this point. I learned that severe mental illness, schizophrenia, schizoaffective and bipolar disorders, major depression that causes suicidal ideation, strikes 3.1 million adults ages 18 and over in the United States each year. The largest group is 18 to 25-year-olds, and research points to 50% of all lifetime mental illnesses beginning by age 14. My son fell into that statistic. Mental illness plays no favorites. It doesn't give a damn about your ethnicity, socioeconomic status or education, whether you come from a loving home or a broken one, it doesn't care. It's the great equalizer, and it can happen to anyone. So after 3 months of treatment, I knew my son's brain still needed time to heal. And none of us were ready to take that leap into self-managed care. So my son came back home after a month at the residential facility with the understanding he would return to El Camino and enter into an intensive outpatient program. It was 5 days a week from 9 to 2:30. I would drop him off and pick him up, and eventually he would go from 5 to 3 days down in the program before he graduated. The program was very unique. It was multidisciplinary. He had a psychiatrist, a nurse, a psychologist, an occupational therapist, along with activities. Because recovering from mental illness is much more than just medications. By December 2014, after 6 months of treatment and years of being held hostage to a brain disease, my son began to find his way back. I saw that smile and the softness in his eyes that had been missing for years. And we were now ready to move into self-managed care because we had finally the right system in place as well, with a psychiatrist, therapist, and services. My son wanted to finish college, but this time we did it the right way. He stayed home and went to community college, taking his time, graduating during the pandemic. And then one day during a daily walk, he said to me, "I'd like to get a job." That job would not be in the field of video game design, which was his original dream. This would be quite simpler. At a local grocer working part-time. And still, that was a huge step. I wanted him to find purpose, to feel that he had a place in society, to find friends because mental illness can be so isolating. I wanted him to have a second chance. Today, he is working part-time, 4 days a week, in a place that embraces him for who he is, and the voices in his head are starting to quiet. Tom Ensel, the former director of the National Institute for Mental Health, calls it the 3 Ps: people, place, and purpose. People with mental illness need support and a safe place. And as they recover, they need to find purpose. It is not a one-size-fits-all solution. It has taken me years to fully understand the meaning of recovery and healing as they apply to mental health. I kept trying to interpret it as literally the body mending from a broken limb, except this is the brain, where someone is battling a neurological disorder. The break is invisible to the eye, as firing neurons run amok unseen. No cast, splint, or boot can frame that problem. Only as my son improved and blended back into society did the nuanced meaning of those words become clear. One day I asked my son, "Did you ever sense something was wrong?" And he said to me, "I knew I had schizophrenia in high school." "How did you know it wasn't something else?" I asked. "I knew because people had other problems. I saw how they acted, and it wasn't what I had. I didn't have that. So I thought either I had schizophrenia or I was autistic. I had racing thoughts and a hard time concentrating. Why didn't you come to me or say something? I would have helped. I feel terrible. You suffer alone." I just didn't know how to explain it, Mom. I didn't know what to say. There are 5 critical takeaways I want to share with you. Mark, can you put up that slide for me? Thank you. The first one is you need to see your child first, and not the illness. No matter how horribly they treat you, your child is not the illness. They have an illness. The second is mental illness is a brain disorder. If you never have been touched by mental illness, the suddenness of it is terrifying, and stigma enters your life. But mental illness is a neurological disease, just like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, or epilepsy. We need to recognize it as such. The third point is, you are not alone. Don't be ashamed to find a mental health support group like NAMI. There is tremendous strength among like families, and the education is invaluable. It makes you more confident and stronger. Fourth, awareness can lead to intervention. Don't be afraid to seek out help early if you suspect something is wrong with your child's mental health. Early intervention and prevention can be key to mitigating a more serious illness or tragedy. I could have done that, but I just thought it was a typical teenage behavior. Don't let yourself be fooled. If you have questions, seek out help. And fifth, continuity of care equals recovery. These key steps include, when in crisis, the first step is getting hospitalized. Treatment, length of hospitalization needs to lead to stabilization. Transition, a discharge plan to maintain stabilization, either by going into a step-down program with 24/7 residential care or a multidisciplinary intensive outpatient treatment program, something that provides tremendous oversight. Recovery, self-managed care with a safety net, psychiatrists, therapists, outside services like case management, whether the person lives alone, in a group home, or with a family. Thank you, Mark. You can pull the slide off now.
All right. No, well, thank you. Thank you so much, Moryt, for sharing your story. We talk a lot about the legal side and the steps you have to take to protect assets and all that, but that is one piece of the puzzle. And Moryt, your story is so extraordinary, and your son's so lucky that you and your husband worked so hard to save him and all the stuff. I mean, when you told me the story about finding your son on the streets of San Francisco, I mean, we all see that. You know, we drive through San Francisco and we see all these people on the streets who have mental illness, and we almost dismiss them, and we don't think about the fact that every one of those men and women is a son or a daughter or a parent or a brother or a sister. And so thank you for humanizing a lot of that, because I think it's so easy for us to get blasé about it. But everybody out there is a human. And it's our mission to help spread the word and to help educate people about what they can do when it's someone in their family. And I wish everybody on the streets had someone like you to come help them. But, you know, I hope these 5 takeaways are very helpful. And so we're going to get to a couple questions at the end. I do want to just talk about the legal side, because that's where we can help. So Moryt is a wonderful resource, and NAMI is a wonderful resource. We're going to put up some information for how to reach out to some of the resources that Moryt used in helping her son on his journey. But just on the legal side, Mike and I will just talk really quickly about all the steps that Moryt went through to save her son. That's all wonderful. And then the key thing is, what happens when mom and dad are out of the picture? How can you be sure that assets are protected? And that's where special needs trust is so crucial. And that's where we can help. You know, we can help connect you with other resources, but on the legal side, a special needs trust is one of, if not the most important document you may ever sign if you have a child with mental illness or a loved one with mental illness. And it's a lifetime of protection that you can provide, at least from a legal and financial standpoint, or is the best you can do. It's a special needs trust. It is a special irrevocable trust designed to hold assets for the benefit of a person with a disability without disturbing eligibility for public benefits. So Moryt, you know, we've helped you with setting that up just to make sure that there's that safety net there for your son. And if he's ever, if he is unable to work, and if he's eligible for government benefit programs, the money in that trust shouldn't interfere with his ability to get those crucial benefits. Mike and I co-authored a book, Special Needs Trust Creation and Management Guide. It's available if you're a client of our office, if you work with us, we will give you a copy. It's also available on Amazon. Just look up Gilfix Special Needs Trust, pretty easy to find it. But again, crucial lifelong safety net. This is a piece. It's not the entire puzzle, but it's a crucial piece of the puzzle. And it's a way to name someone you trust to oversee assets for the benefit of your child after you're gone. They can retain public benefits eligibility for SSI, Medi-Cal, and it can address the lifelong cost of care. We work with families on how to think about that, how to make sure there's enough money there. We had wonderful discussions about that, Moryt. And it has to be integrated with your overall estate plan. So it's not just enough to set up a special needs trust. You want to set that up as a separate document. But you need to make sure that your living trust, your powers of attorney are all coordinated with that, and that all your financial assets are coordinated as part of your estate plan. Life insurance, if you have that, retirement accounts, they all have to be coordinated. We have to coordinate with other family members. So don't try this at home. Work with expert attorneys who live and breathe this. There aren't that many attorneys who specialize in this. We are very proud of our heritage in doing that, because it's not just the trust. It's a bunch of other pieces. And again, that's only the legal and financial side. Moryt just talked about all the other pieces that we have to have into place in making sure that a loved one with mental illness is taken care of and they get the resources that they need. And it is a journey, as you say. It is not an easy path. With the right resources, you can do so much. So again, we can of course help. If you have questions about this, we can help you. If it's been a while since you addressed planning, or you don't have a special needs trust in place and you need it, we can help with that. There's other issues we always want to talk about if you have a house and other things, but just before we get to some questions, I want to make a key point here that if you don't have a plan in place, there is no safety net there for your child. It's not there until you sign a plan, sign your updated trust, have that special needs trust in place. We would love to get the chance to help you. If you have questions about this, you can contact us at gilfix.com. And, especially on the special needs planning side, if you're not sure if we're a match, we're always happy to chat for a few minutes just to see if you're a match. Chat for 10-15 minutes to make sure that we're the right fit for you, the right fit for us. So I'll give our information. So of course, if you want to reach out to our office, you can reach us at 650-493-8070 and gilfix.com. If you have questions about special needs planning, set that meeting. It is the most important legal document you may ever create. So we are here as a resource. We work with hundreds and hundreds of families on special needs planning, just like Moryt's family, and helping her and to put that structure in place for her son. So Mike, before we get to some questions and some other resources on the mental health side, or mental health resources, any thoughts you have before we get to a couple questions?
I do indeed. And let's remind, if anybody has, we have a couple already, but other questions, use the Q&A function. And that's where you can enter your question. We'll try to get to all of them and respond. So yeah, two things. One is many folks think about a conservatorship, where you go to court and a judge appoints you to be the conservator for your son or daughter. Usually that's set up a conservatorship for a parent who's starting to have competency issues, but it can be for anybody at any time. So just to understand that the type of conservatorship that we can initiate when there's an issue does not give the type of power that's needed when somebody is having a mental health crisis. That's the 5150, also known as LPS conservatorship. It's got many terms, but that's where somebody is literally a danger to himself or others. It's a high bar. Somebody usually has to crash and burn before there can be this type of conservatorship imposed. And that's why Moryt was talking about how, you said you had to stand on the sidelines and watch. I mean, it's this helpless, terrible feeling that you can see what's coming, but you're helpless to intervene. So, it's a real challenge. So again, the regular type of conservatorship does not give the power that's needed, for example, to compel somebody to be in a mental health facility, to be in a locked facility. That's the 5150, the more extreme. That authorizes psychotropic drugs, mental health holds, the 72-hour hold, the 14-day hold. And many folks who are subject to these conservatorships, they start to learn the ropes. If they can sound competent and say the right words after a period of time, they can usually get out from under that conservatorship. It's very frustrating for so many families when their kids learn how to avoid these things, okay? Another thing that occurred to me is one of the very few steps that can be taken, but it's still brand new, really, and untried in so many ways. It's something that is known as Laura's Law. Laura's Law. And that is a relatively new statute that has been implemented in Santa Clara County. Not all counties have implemented it. And in limited circumstances, it allows family members to get a court order compelling certain types of mental treatment. Now, again, it's a lower bar than this 5150 conservatorship where somebody has to already have crashed. This is where you can see the signs, have to get the appropriate documentation, probably from a psychiatrist. How that's going to play out over the years, who knows? But it is a new tool that is available so that arrangements can be made for what's called assisted outpatient treatment. AOT, another term that we all have to learn and be familiar with. So that is a possibility. Third point I'll make before maybe we get to some questions is there is something that has limited power, but it's a good idea. And maybe we haven't talked about this with your son yet, but it's a psychiatric advance directive or a mental health advance directive. We have advanced healthcare directives that every one of us should sign, where we say two things. Number one, we name the person who can make healthcare decisions for us if we can't. And in the advanced directive for healthcare, we can explain how we want decisions made for things like end of life, organ donations, certain things you do not want done, etc. So the idea here is take this into the mental health realm, where an individual can identify objectives, treatments they accept, that they reject, that they don't want. It's not as powerful in many ways as the advanced healthcare directive on the physiological side. And again, they're relatively new. Not many people have done them. So the idea is that if somebody is having mental health issues, they usually have times when they are very coherent and cooperative. And it's in that window that we can try to sit down with that person and have them sign 3 documents: advanced healthcare directive, durable power of attorney, and the mental health document. Again, many folks are not willing to do that. It's new. The language is still evolving to make it most effective. But so there are a few other things that are available, and there's a lot of misinformation about them.
Well, why don't we show some resources? Yeah, I think if you have questions about this, you got to set a meeting with us to discuss it, or with an expert, because there's so many paths you can follow here, and there's so many issues that, and depending on the specific issues your loved one faces, there's many different paths we often have to go down. And Moryt very kindly shared. So by the way, if you're watching this as a recording, if you get a lot out of this, please like the video, share it with anybody who could benefit from this. Subscribe to our Gilfix Law YouTube channel, and just, again, to share some resources. So of course, you can reach out to us if you'd like to explore these in more detail and putting that special needs plan into place, or some of the documents Mike just talked about, or pursuing some of those paths. And Moryt wanted to share some other mental health resources that were helpful to her. So Moryt, so NAMI, so you can reach out to NAMI. They have a Healthline, El Camino Hospital Behavioral Health Program, Stanford Outpatients. This is mainly if you're in the Bay Area. But Moryt, any points you want to make here about these resources?
Yeah, I just want to jump in a second on something that Mike said, because I want to clarify something a little bit. So when you first are brought in by normally through the police on a 5150, a psych hold, that really only gives that individual 72 hours to be held. And that 5150, that's when something Mike said, which is absolutely true. And if you have a very smart child like I did, they managed to weasel out of going any further. So that's really only for 72 hours, at which time you're really trying to get longer care. And so during that medical review, that's when you're hoping to get the child into more of the 14-day involuntary hold, which is an extension of the 5150, which now becomes a 5152. It's all a bunch of numbers. But ultimately, even after that 14-day hold, to get your child conserved, the doctors have to actually petition the courts to have your child conserved. In Santa Clara County, we have a behavioral health court under Judge Stephen Manley. And that court enables you to get the child conserved. And even then, there are different types of conservatorships for mental health. I don't want to get into all of it, but in this case, we were under that LPS conservatorship that Mike was talking about, which enables your child to have an extensive period of time where the public guardian is now the conservator for your child, not you, not the doctors. So there's a lot going on. There was a question I saw in there asking how you can get your child control of your child's health when they're over 18. And this is probably the only way to do it is through an LPS conservatorship, or a doctor gets a temporary conservatorship. So I just wanted to clarify that. And I also, before we even quickly got into the questions, I just want to make sure that everybody understands that it's really important not to give up. I mean, it can be some of the darkest times and you're absolutely convinced that there's absolutely no hope and it's just not going to turn right. But this is why I wanted everybody to hear this story, because our story is proof that it can turn. Yeah, my child is working, he's stable, he lives with us, you know, we're committed to it, but it can happen. And so I know there are a lot of people out there where it's just very tough. And so I just wanted to make sure people know that don't give up, that there is hope, and our story is one of those hope stories. So
I love that. Yeah, no, I love that. And we have actually a lot of questions and comments. So yeah, we have a question about, has there been a change in conservatorships because of Britney Spears? In that case, I'm not aware of any recent changes that might lead to later changes down the road.
well, and it's also, Mark, that's has nothing to do with the mental health kind of conservatorship.
Yeah,
We're talking
right.
about, that was a completely different kind of conservatorship that she was under.
Yeah, no, and that got a lot of media attention in an area that normally doesn't get much media attention. So I think that was good that people became aware of the issue. But yeah,
Totally.
very different situation there. And actually, so we have a question from Ellen about, what if a creditor or other money challenges whether the special needs child is disabled or not? Can someone break a special needs trust if they can prove that someone's not disabled? No. So a special needs trust is an irrevocable trust managed by a third party, whether the person who's the beneficiary has a quote disability or not. That doesn't affect someone's ability to break the trust or to challenge it. That it really, whether someone has a disability or not, really just goes to government benefits. The trust is just an irrevocable trust that has some protections. It's not designed for asset protection per se. There's other trusts we'd set for that. But bottom line is, whether your child has a disability or not, a special needs trust, when in doubt, if you're concerned your child might have issues down the road, always set up the trust. Whether their diagnosis matches it or not, the trust is still very powerful. And any last questions, Mike, that you think we should address before we wrap things up?
You know, one of the, I'm not even going to try to give an answer because I think the question makes the point. What did the mother set up so that she can bypass all the laws for children over 18? And I mean, the answer is that it's a journey. You know, grappled with it more than bypassed it, because there's so many protections in place for an adult over the age of 18. And we were chatting earlier to the effect that some of those protections get in the way of what's in the best interest of somebody with a mental health challenge. And last comment, somebody identifies a particular diagnosis, agnosia, which is
Ananosia. It's actually not spelled correctly. It's ananosia. It's the lack of insight.
There's agnosia, but we'll have our
But if that is what they're referencing, the lack of insight, it's a different word. But I don't know.
Well, I think, why don't we share the resource? I don't want to get down to one specific thing.
Right.
Yeah. Any final thoughts before we wrap up? And I'll share that screen with the resources in just a moment. But Mike, any last questions you wanted to address? Or
yeah, look, I'll just say our book is really practical. It's meant to give people concise information. Moryt has a copy. You know, get it if you just want to have a primer on special needs, how they fit together. And just to say, we've worked in this area since the 80s. Maybe some people have comparable experience, but nobody has more. And I'm usually not this over the top direct, but you know, the attorney has to know what's going on, not just in the law, but in the community. What are the community resources and how do you find them and how do you pull them together? So we're a very viable resource for you.
yeah, and I want to thank Moryt again for sharing the story. I think the key thing is is hope. It can feel very, very hopeless. We hear this from clients all the time. They just the line, I'm afraid to die. And that's after they're gone. We can help at least put the structure into place. But while you're around, what can you do to get help for your child? And I think that's so valuable, Moryt, what you just shared. So again, just a couple of resources. Here are some resources. If you're in the Bay Area in California, here are some resources. You can pause the video if you're watching it here just for some. And Moryt is, and actually just if you want to reach out to us, very easy to find us as well. If you want to get a plan into place or review your existing plan, reach out to us at Gilfix in the poll. And Moryt, if people wanted to reach you directly, how could they do that?
Do you still have the, well, you can put it in the chat, but do you still have the slide? I don't know if you have that available.
So I
but
don't have it. Is it okay if people email you and we can give it verbally here?
Absolutely.
In the
Yeah.
description?
So yeah, just my name, morytmilo@gmail.com. We can just put it into the
description. Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
MORYTMILO@gmail.com. Moryt Milo, just her name at gmail.com. And she's very kindly offered to be a resource to people. And we hope to do some talks with NAMI as well and to reach that community. But, thank you again. And thank you to everybody who joined us here today. We know this is just such a challenging area. So on that note, we're going to wrap things up. But again, if you watch this as a recording, like it, subscribe to our channel, share it with anybody who could benefit from this. And I hope everybody's staying safe, sane, and healthy out there, and wish you a happy holidays. Take care.
Thank you.